Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in today. This is Superstar Communicator Podcast and live stream, co-hosted by Nick Simon and Susan Heaton-Wright. We talk about everything related to being a great spoken communicator. And I don't necessarily mean speaking. It's communicating. It's two-way. And this is really important to really think about, because so often people consider that, oh, I've got to speak like a boss. But in fact, you've got to communicate like a boss. And part of the Superstar Communicator work that we do is to have effective two-way conversations. And a number of our clients find it very difficult, very challenging to have difficult conversations, or conversations where people have opposing views. Either it is a difficult conversation, or it is within a meeting where there's opposition to a particular idea, and this can be very difficult. So I was delighted when I was approached by our guest today, who is an absolute expert in navigating these difficult conversations. Best-selling author Diana Peterson Moore is a former practicing employment lawyer. She focuses on people, strategies, and organizational systems to support strategic workplace goals. She's a blogger, a guest columnist, and a frequent conference presenter. She's been featured in CEO magazine and on numerous podcasts. Diana's first book, Managing in Turbulent Times, A Practical Guide to Leadership, is on Amazon and a #1 bestseller, everybody. Her second book, Can We Just Get Along? Rodney King, Courageous Communication, A Return to Civility, was published last month and is also an Amazon bestseller. She received a BA from UCLA and JD from Loyola Law School in the United States. So I'd like to welcome you, Diana.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. I'm thrilled that you invited me to participate.
What made you write the book?
Well, I think probably the contentiousness around politics in my country, and certainly the rise of authoritarianism worldwide. And just because I think that, again, in my country in particular, families are broken apart via politics, people, neighbors, communities. And I just thought it was important for us to find a way back to having civil dialogue.
That is a really, really good reason. Nick, you're nodding. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was interested to see you've been a lawyer, executive officer, and an HR lead. And I was just wondering how, which of those would you say has influenced your writing the most?
I would say it's an accumulation of my life experiences. When I was coming up in the corporate world, I had advice from people who were far more senior than I. And one vice president, I'll never forget, he said, "You need to take the 15-second pause." And then fast forward to a couple of jobs after that. And somebody said to me, "You need to contemplate in the cool of the evening." And I think that's because I'm very verbal. I'm a trumpet, which I describe in my first book, meaning, kind of brain to mouth to out. And there are a lot of people who are French horns, brain to mouth and then out. And so I've learned to not respond right away if I have, bodily reaction, a lizard brain reaction, and to respond after the fact. So that's something, as I say to people that I work with, I made a lot of mistakes. as a first-time manager. The good news is I learned from those mistakes. The better news is I'm willing to share those mistakes with you so you won't make them. So truthfully, it's just really a life spent observing others, being fascinated by how people are aligned with organizational values and personal experience, really.
And you mentioned the lizard brain
Yes.
kind of thinking. Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yes. It's found in my second book. In fact, I think the second chapter is on the lizard brain. It is the oldest part of the brain that's really the fight or flight mechanism. And I did some research on it, which is really fascinating for me. But it's that somebody says something and you respond right away. And it's often not pleasant. It's really kind of the survival mechanism. And for me, because I am kind of a trumpet, I would respond right away. And I learned over time that I would often say something that I regretted. And of course, we all do that. So an apology is appropriate. But by waiting, I was able to be more objective, more neutral in my language. I have a story about that, a personal story, if anybody's interested.
Please share that.
My last corporate job was head of human resources for the Times Mirror Company, which was the enterprise level for a whole bunch of companies. So it had a newspaper group and a magazine group and a training group and blah, blah, blah. And there was a person, I had 6 direct reports. There was one who reported to me who was a challenge. An individual who was very competent technically, but had very poor get along with others skills.
Right. Okay.
So one evening, she happened to have been a female. She walked into my office, and I don't remember the content of the conversation, but I could feel myself starting to get upset. And I said to the person, and let's just call her Rosemary. I said, Rosemary, I need you to leave my office. This is not a good time for me. And Rosemary stayed. And I said, Rosemary, I need you to leave my office. And Rosemary stayed, and I got up and I left my office. And I was angry. And I have advisors. So I called up 1 or 2 of my advisors to find out if I was overreacting or if I was not, the content of the conversation, which I have no memory of. And they all said, no, that was okay. So I walked in the next morning and I called Rosemary into my office and I said, Rosemary, I said, the reason I stopped the meeting last night was because I was getting angry. I said, I'm still angry, and let me tell you why. And that was devastating to her. Had I reacted by showing my anger, she would have dismissed me, and it would have gotten around the department. Oh, there goes Diana again, flying off the handle. But this way, she couldn't dismiss me. And it was a very potent lesson for me, and one that I share with others. It's actually in my first book because I think we all have those experiences. And for me personally, if I start to have one of those negative reactions, I have a physical reaction to it. And anytime I feel that, I just kind of cool my jets, slow down, delay a conversation. And so, Nick, that's a very long-winded way of saying that was the lizard brain reaction. That's kind of the fight or flight, which we need. I mean, there are times when you need to have that. If you're in Ukraine right now and you're in the middle of the war, you need to respond to those feelings, but in those same feelings that can protect us. And way back when, at the beginning of our humanity, it saved us from being, eaten by animals or whatever. But now, in what I would call civil society, it can harm us as well.
Do you think that there are situations, because you said that with Rosemary, she already had issues with getting on with other people, that you were triggered even before you had that meeting? Oh no, it's Rosemary.
Yes, I think so. And I think there's certain people we like and certain people we don't like. And I think as a manager, one has to have the ability to separate out personal from professional, which is something I've always prided myself in doing. But then honestly, and that's why I have kind of these trusted advisors, because there are a few people that I didn't like for whatever reason. And I would kind of bend over backwards to be fair with those individuals, sometimes to my detriment. So if I was confused about how to proceed, I would use one of my advisors. And I have 3 of them, and I know they all have my best interests at heart. So they are people that I continue to call upon. But yes, I think you're correct there, Susan. And I think, in fact, once again, back in my, at Times Mirror, I would get the leadership team together, and we would literally force rank people by performance. So when it was time to give raises, rather than give everyone an across the board raise, because that really does not motivate your star performers, we would kind of force rank everybody, put the money together in a pool, and allocate raises accordingly. And it was very interesting because somebody who was not at a senior level, but somebody who was lower down in the organization, all 6 of my direct reports rated that person higher than I did. And I realized that I really just didn't like that individual, to be blunt. But I took their advice because, again, even though I pride myself in being able to separate out personal from professional, clearly, in that case, I hadn't. So that suggests to me that one can never be 100% neutral.
It was really useful that you, sorry, Mick. It was really useful that you had other people that you could get an average from.
Yeah.
So that made it better.
Well, I really think leaders have to be followers as well. Leaders have to, somebody once, the kind of consultant I am today, I took advantage of through my own corporate career. And somebody once told me, think of a band. And I happen to live in Pasadena, California, very close to the Rose Parade. So I see a lot of those bands every year. And this individual said, a band leader, if you watch him or her, usually a him, they move forward and they come back. They move forward and they come back. And that's how they're leading the band. And this happened to have been a woman. And she said to me, so Diana, if you're the band leader and you're down the block and around the corner, nobody can follow you. So that for me was very helpful because I'm kind of a change agent type person. I'm never met a question that I didn't have an answer for. And I move at a speed faster than other people, which is not right or wrong or good or bad. It just is. And so I need to be able to accommodate that. And certainly as a corporate leader needed to be able to accommodate that.
I wanted to ask, the book is based on 3 years of survey data.
Yes.
Did the survey data surprise you in any way?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There were 8 questions. There were a couple of demographic questions because I know people, me, I don't like to, when someone says there's going to be a 20 or 30 minute survey, I tend to not sign up. Yeah. And I kind of ask people if the survey data are really the summary data are in the first chapter of the book. And I kind of asked people, how would you self-describe your worldview? And people were pretty much across the board in terms of being conservative, pragmatic, liberal, progressive, whatever. And one of the questions was, who do you speak more frequently with? And of course, as to be expected, most of us tend to speak more frequently with people who agree with us. And then one of the questions was, what do you think about people who have different worldviews? And I fully expected people largely to say wrong. And really 3 separate times, and this was international data, they came back and said something to the effect of they're just different or they have a different background. And I kept saying, no, that's wrong. People are in denial. They're not being honest. And finally, after the 3rd survey, I looked at one of the other questions, which I found to be really compelling. And it said, I'm willing to listen to people with a different point of view. And always or almost always was 70%. And I thought to myself, okay, Diana, people are, and likely because of differences within families, are willing to listen to others. And that then set me on a path. Trust me, I had several false starts about this book because I thought, geez, I'm not a psychologist. I can't, talk about people being in denial, which is what I thought. Now, interestingly enough, I recently had a conversation with somebody who was head of the public TV station in our area. I had done a project for him, and he retired and became a mediator. And he called me up and he said, he was also completely stumped by the data. And he said, maybe it's just aspirational. Maybe people really aren't being honest here. And I said, well, whether they're being honest or not, perception is reality. And if they perceive themselves as being willing to listen to others, that assisted me in how I was going to write the book. But yes, Nick, it surprised me. So who knows? Who knows what the answer is? But I thought it doesn't really matter at this point. Now it's about what are tools that you can share with others that they may use to assist them in coming back to a more civil environment.
Now, first of all, if anybody is listening in and you've got a question or you want to say hello, please leave a message and we'll make sure that it gets passed on to Diana. You mentioned early on that in your country at the moment, there are two very opposite sides in many things. And we see this with lots of international events and thoughts. So, for example, the vaccine was very polarizing, wasn't it? Certainly in this country, in the United Kingdom, we had Brexit. And, I have to be honest, I was in the library and somebody was with her finger in my face because she had an opposing view. I thought it was a civilized conversation, but something triggered her. And these are nasty things. What tips do you have for managing that sort of situation?
Well, thank you. And yes, I mean, that happens to all of us. Me recently at the dry cleaners, I think part of it is listening. And there are, I'm fortunately, when I was at Times Mirror, I became a trained facilitator. We had 3 training companies, one of which was Zanger Miller. And I think it's really important. And as a facilitator, there are little phrases that one uses and learns about. And I would say things like, that's interesting. Help me understand. Tell me more. Can you put some more words around that? So you're really trying to understand instead of, as I say in one of my chapters, a legal term, assuming facts not in evidence, assuming what somebody else is thinking. And I think that listening without comment and really trying to understand is a way back. But it's difficult, again, because of that good old lizard brain and so forth. And so I was recently at the dry cleaners and I parked my car and a big truck came in right after me. We have a lot of these large trucks that are a little bit scary when you're on the roadway or the freeway here. And this guy goes darting in to get in front of me because I had to walk around my car and get my clothes out. So I walk in and he's picking up a shirt. And then he says, oh, I'm going to be traveling to the only individual working. Would you mind folding it? And then he kind of is looking at me because he knew it was going to take time. And he said to the worker, take her first. And she said, no, I'll fold it. So we're standing there. And what do you talk about? The weather had been particularly hot. And I said, it's very hot. Oh, I apologize. My dog's getting ready to protect me from whomever is walking by. And I said, yes, climate change. And he goes, and I said, I said, I didn't, say why climate change, but wouldn't you agree that the climate has changed? And he kind of said yes and calmed way down. And then I proceeded to say, there are things over which we have no control and things over which we do have control. And I said, I tend to watch science programs on our public TV. One of them's called Nova. And I said, they had just shown something where the reason they finally figured out why the pyramids at Giza were built there, because in that time frame, there was a finger of the Nile that came around. And then there was something about whale bones found in the Sahara. So I said, clearly climate changes, that there are climate changes that have nothing to do with human activity. But I said, then there are things that do have human activity involvement. And I said, that's what I personally focus on. But it was interesting because climate change is really a neutral comment, but it triggered something in him.
Yes.
And so I worked very hard to follow, to practice what I preach, as the saying is here. And it was interesting because then he kind of calmed down, and then he was fine. And he finally apologized for kind of cutting in line here. I thought the whole incident was interesting to me, but it's, sometimes things happen when you least expect them. So it's kind of tried and true. If you practice, and practice makes perfect. So if you practice the change in conduct, it then becomes kind of second nature.
Do you want to go and get the dog?
I apologize. I think what I'm going to do is close the door. Actually, yeah, I apologize. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay.
So while we're waiting, if there is anybody that's listening who wants to ask a question, do feel free, because Diana clearly knows what she's talking about, and this is a really good opportunity to ask questions. I know that in the United Kingdom that it's evening, so it might be that you want to ask questions later, and I'm sure that Diana will see and be able to answer questions as well. I'm not quite sure what's going on in the background, but there we go. I think the dog's
I am so sorry. We have the gardener was here with a leaf blower, and my dog goes insane. So I had to run. I'm upstairs. I had to run downstairs. I apologize.
Okay. So you mentioned, we've talked about the lizard brain, and we've talked about the power of listening. You also talk about facts and opinions and going back from the emotion to look at the facts. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. Facts are provable. Opinions are just what we kind of think. And I think what's happened, at least in my country, when it comes to politics, that, and I use this expression in the book, opinions masquerading as fact.
Yes.
Part of the problem is, I think, the proliferation of online media and, TikTok and X and just all of these various programs. But I also think that, and there's a consumption of a lot of conspiracy theories. And I really feel like individuals are moving away from facts, because there was a politician, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who's no longer with us, who would say, you can argue on opinions, but not on facts. And facts have become just very muddied. I suspect that's probably going on outside of this country as well.
Yeah.
But people's beliefs and so many of these concepts are intertwined, because I'm a real believer in conflict management as opposed to conflict resolution. And that's because most, or many, at least seemingly today, most conflicts arise from a difference in values, heritage, culture. People, religion, and those values are constant, and those values inform our beliefs. But I've done conflict management training, and I use abortion and I use gun safety as an example, because these are seemingly intractable, issues. But my feeling is, if you kind of say, okay, what divides you? And then what do you have in common?
Yes.
Then what are the activities that will support what you have in common? So you kind of go to that hackneyed phrase of the win-win. So, that can happen also with opinions masquerading as facts, to really look at facts. It's kind of tough, though, because people argue about facts just because we have a head of a political party that doesn't tell the truth an awful lot.
Yeah.
And the people who follow that individual tend to take everything he says as the truth. And that's a huge problem. Fortunately, it seems to be a percent that's less than 50%, which is the good news. So we shall see what happens. I mean, we have an election coming up pretty darn quickly.
Yes. We've had a message from Abdul. Abdul, lovely to see you. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow at our dinner. Abdul says there are times we struggle with the unspoken words, especially with the ethnic minority and people of color. You feel from the conversation there is a lack of genuinity. What is your advice on how to communicate effectively to diffuse the situation and also make a statement? What a brilliant question. Thank you.
And not an easy one. There's something in my book, and I was raised as a kind of a generic Christian, and there's the golden rule. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think most of us tend to communicate that way. Diana has a way of communicating and preferences, and so I assume that Susan does, or Nick does, or Abdul does. And I kind of said, okay, what about the platinum rule, which is I should be communicating with Susan the way she takes in information, or Nick the way he takes in information, or Abdul the way he takes in information. And sometimes you can ask somebody. Some people prefer things in writing. Some people, especially in the workplace, some people, I'm the kind of person, if you tell me something, I tend to remember it. But there are a lot of people that you tell them something and you have to follow it up in writing.
Yes.
And, and I've had managers say, well, that's too much work. And so I'll say, well, let's say Nick is someone who takes in information that way. I might say, Nick, I want to make sure I was clear. So do me a favor, go back to your office and send me an email with your understanding. And even though I might think I was clear as a bell, if Nick's email doesn't reflect, I'll say, I accept responsibility for that. And I'll say, Nick, I apologize. Let me try it this way. And, I keep kind of shifting. So it's tough with what Abdul is saying, because a lot of us we all live in very diverse environments now. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, so I have always lived in a multicultural, diverse environment. I was having this conversation with some friends over the weekend. I went to Venice High School, which was extremely diverse, with races and ethnicities and religions. I mean, everybody was there. And we all learned how we could understand and get along with one another. But honestly, I have friends who are white, who are my age, who will say, how come you have Black friends? Or how come you have Asian friends? And, it's hard for me. I don't know. I mean, people are people. And ultimately, I think we all have the same hopes, dreams, and aspirations. We want a roof over our head, food in our bellies, good education, and a better life for our children and grandchildren than what we had. So I think part of it is Abdul is really listening and also being able to say to someone, you know, I felt this way when this was said. And one of the things that I try to do is minimize the you. I try to own everything by saying we should all use I statements. And it's not, you said something mean. It's, I felt X when this was said, and it's obvious the other person said it. Using you statements often feels like an accusation, which then triggers the lizard brain, and then you get into a big fight. So I recently had something. I have, you probably can't see it now because it's faded, but I've had white hair for a long time. So I put purple on the bottom. And one day I was with a friend and we were walking someplace, and just coincidentally, 3 different people said, "Oh, I like your hair. Oh, I like your hair." And finally, she says to the third person, "Well, don't you like my hair?" And the guy said, "Well, yeah, sure, if you put purple in it," or something like that. I didn't think anything of it. She looks at me, and this is someone who's known me for a long time, and she says, "Is that why you do it?" And I said, "What?" She said, "Do you put purple in your hair so people will compliment you?" And I said, "No." I said, "I do it because I like it." And I was very hurt at the time, but didn't say anything because I was afraid of what I might say. And after the fact, I had a conversation. I said, I have to tell you this. I haven't been able to let it go. But when we were at, wherever, and this comment was made, I was surprised and hurt. That's all I said. I was surprised and hurt. And then there was a long silence, and the individual then responded. But I could not have said that at the time because I probably wouldn't have been as neutral sounding as I am now. So I guess the keys are listening. The keys are honestly giving feedback using I statements, and maybe waiting before you respond right away.
So you really, these are your top tips: understanding the lizard brain and how we can get triggered or, have a response, and then using facts rather than opinions.
Yeah.
And finally, the superpower of listening without comment. Abdul, was lovely. Thank you for a wonderful response. And when we see you tomorrow, Abdul, we can discuss this further.
Well, thank you, Abdul, because sometimes I'm not always sure if what I'm saying, because I know what I'm saying, I'm not sure if I'm communicating in a way that's helpful. So thank you for the comment. I appreciate that.
So before we finish, Nick, have you got anything else to say?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, your book is dedicated to Rodney King. Can you explain why that is?
Yes. Now, at least in my country, and I suspect in the UK as well, anytime there is a police incident, somebody whips out a cell phone and does a video. Well, Rodney King, I live in Pasadena, California, and just north of that is Altadena, California. Rodney King lived in Altadena, California. He was driving along the foothills and was stopped by the police for, I think, drunk driving. He was severely beaten, and somebody had a video camera. This was prior to cell phone, and this had to be in the I think this was the early 1990s, took a video of it, and then gave that video to a TV station, which ran it. It caused then a series of, and again, this is usage of words in South LA, where a lot, Rodney King's African-American, all of the police officers were white, where at the time, excuse me, a lot of African-Americans lived. And some called it a riot, some called it civil unrest, some called it a revolution, but there was several days of looting. A white truck driver was pulled from his car and severely beaten, and it was really pent-up energy and a lot of bad stuff. Well, here's Rodney King, who was at the center of all of it, and at the time, the governor called for kind of a breather, shall we say. And Rodney King was a spokesperson and said, after having been severely beaten, said, "Can we all just get along?" And I dedicated the book to him because that has always been seared in my memory. I mean, how amazing was that for him to rise above what had happened? And then actually the last chapter kind of details the facts of what happened. And there was, litigation, and there was, Rodney King died at a very young age. And who knows, was it from, his head was severely beaten. It was really a sad and unfortunate incident. And I don't know, I've always, just because of where I live and where he lived, he was always kind of a hometown boy from my standpoint. And one has to ask himself, herself, would I have had the grace to do what he did? Calling for peace and calm after having been severely beaten. It was very scary. And then after that, of course, now again, with the proliferation of cell phones, people are taking videos left, right, and center. But this was the first one.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that. I don't think there are any more questions. So I'd like to thank you, Diana, for coming on today, for being so honest and so human as well. Because one of the things about being a leader is that authenticity and that humility to understand when you make an error or have a mistake, and to understand what's going on inside. I wish many more people would adopt that approach to leadership, because the world would be a better place, wouldn't it, if we understood this. Are you going to say something, Diana?
Well, I agree. And yesterday, I just happened to have seen something on Angela Merkel and her leadership, and kind of the backlash, because over the weekend, I think a far-right party in Germany won some seats in
yes.
And in Parliament. And I thought, change is never linear. It's kind of 2 steps forward, 1 behind, 3 steps forward, 2 behind. But I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said this, and President Obama did. The arc is always forward thinking and always to a better way. So fingers crossed that we're just at a period where there's a slight pause, but we will continue on that long arc of civility, humanity, and social justice.
Yes. So thank you very much. I know that there are going to be people listening today that are interested in Diana's book. It is Can We Just Get Along? Rodney King, Courageous Communication, A Return to Civility, by Diana Peterson Moore, which is available on Amazon and other sites. I will put information about this to make sure that people are able to book it, to buy it. Thank you so much, Diana.
Thank you. And I apologize on behalf of my dog and me.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.